My dear dad chose my cruel stepmom over me for years. When I refused to invite her to I am Patricia, 28 years old, and my wedding is in just 2 weeks. The happiest day of my life should be filled with joy, but instead, it has become a battlefield. For 14 years, my stepmom Diane has made my life miserable, and my father has always taken her side. When I decided not to invite her to my wedding, my father unleashed his fury. Now he is spreading lies about me to our entire family. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button as we dive into a tale of family betrayal that taught me to stand up for myself. My childhood was the kind most people dream of having. My parents, Thomas and Sarah, created a warm, loving home where laughter echoed through the halls. Every weekend meant family adventures, whether exploring local parks or baking cookies together during thunderstorms. My mum was my best friend, teaching me to see beauty in everything. She would brush my hair each night before bed while sharing stories about her own childhood, creating a connection that felt unbreakable. Everything changed when I turned 10. Mum started having terrible headaches that would leave her bedridden for days. After weeks of concerning symptoms, my father finally convinced her to see a doctor. I remember sitting in our living room playing with my favorite stuffed rabbit when they returned from that appointment. Their faces told me everything before they spoke a single word. Stage 4 brain cancer. The doctors gave her 12 months at most. Those 12 months became 8. The vibrant woman who once danced around our kitchen while making pancakes faded before my eyes. Her beautiful auburn hair fell out, her skin became translucent, and her once melodic voice grew raspy and weak. But even as cancer ravaged her body, her spirit remained unbroken. She made my father promise to record every milestone in my life. She would miss creating memory boxes for my future birthdays, graduation, and even my wedding day. When I was 12, she passed away on a quiet Sunday morning while I held her hand. My father and I were both there as she took her final breath, smiling at us one last time before slipping away. The pain was indescribable. It felt like someone had ripped out part of my soul, leaving a gaping wound that nothing could fill. My father fell apart after the funeral. He would sit in their bedroom for hours, holding her sweaters and breathing in what remained of her perfume. I would find him asleep, with her photos clutched to his chest, tear tracks dried on his cheeks. For months, our house felt like a tomb rather than a home. Dinner became takeout containers eaten in silence. Laundry piled up until I taught myself how to use the washing machine. At 12 years old, I became both the daughter and the caretaker. Despite my own grief, I knew I needed to be strong for both of us. I maintained my grades, kept our house in order, and made sure my father ate regular meals. On particularly bad days, I would climb into his bed and simply hold his hand, just as we had held my mother's. Slowly, painfully, we began to heal together. Our grief formed a bond between us that felt unbreakable. We created new traditions like Sunday morning pancakes, where we would share our favorite memories of Mum. For 2 years, it was just the two of us against the world. We navigated holidays, school events, and everyday challenges as a team. When I needed help with math homework, he would stay up late to work through problems with me. When he had a difficult day at work, I would make his favorite dinner. We were partners in our shared loss, finding strength in each other when everything else felt unbearable. Then Diane entered our lives when I was 14. My father met her at a work conference, and their relationship progressed quickly. The first time I met her, I was cautiously optimistic. She was beautiful with perfectly styled blonde hair and a dazzling smile. She laughed at all my father's jokes and shahs and asked thoughtful questions about my interests. Most importantly, she made my father smile again. Real, genuine smiles that reached his eyes for the first time in years. But there were moments, brief flashes, when I caught something else behind her perfect exterior. The way her smile would drop instantly when my father looked away. How her eyes narrowed when he mentioned a happy memory with my mother. How she would interrupt me whenever I started sharing childhood stories. These warning signs were subtle, easily dismissed as my teenage anxiety about change. I wanted my father to be happy, so I ignored that uneasy feeling in my stomach whenever she was around. If only I had trusted my instincts from the beginning, perhaps everything would have turned out differently. But I was young, still healing, and desperate to see my father whole again. So I welcomed Diane into our lives with open arms, not realizing I was inviting in someone who would spend years trying to erase me from my father's heart. Everything changed once Diane moved into our home after a whirlwind 6-month romance. The warm, caring woman who had charmed us both disappeared, revealing someone entirely different when the front door closed. While she maintained her perfect facade in public and around my father, when we were alone, her true colours emerged. The changes were subtle at first. She would reorganize my belongings while I was at school, claiming she was just helping to clean. She would prepare dinner just before I got home from volleyball practice, serving my father first and leaving barely enough for me. If I mentioned these behaviours to my father, she would tearfully deny them, painting me as an ungrateful teenager who was simply struggling to accept their relationship. Our home began to transform under her influence. Family photos featuring my mother mysteriously disappeared from the walls, replaced by professional portraits of my father and Diane. When I asked about the missing photos, Diane claimed they were safely stored away because looking at them every day was preventing my father from healing completely. My protests were dismissed as childish attachment issues. My father, so desperate to move forward and build a new life, became blind to the subtle war being waged in our home. He was working longer hours at his accounting firm, leaving Diane and me alone together more frequently. During these times, she would make comments about my appearance, suggesting that my clothes were unflattering or that I should consider wearing makeup to look more presentable. She would compare me to her friends' daughters, always finding me lacking in some way. The dynamic between my father and me shifted dramatically under Diane's watchful eye. Our Sunday pancake tradition faded away, replaced by brunches at upscale restaurants where Diane would dominate the conversation with stories about her work and social connections. The easy communication we once shared became strained, with Diane always positioning herself between us physically and emotionally. My 16th birthday marked a turning point in our deteriorating relationship. My father had promised to take the day off work so we could visit the Science Museum, an annual tradition my mother had started. The night before, Diane announced she had booked a couples massage for them, insisting my father deserved some relaxation after his stressful week. Instead of our planned day together, I was told Diane would pick me up from school and take me shopping as my birthday gift. When school ended, I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours before calling home. Diane answered, her voice dripping with false concern, as she claimed she thought I had made plans with friends after school. By the time she arrived, the sun was setting and my birthday was essentially over. When we returned home, she presented me with a cake in front of my father, playing the role of the thoughtful stepmom who had given me a special day. That night, after my father went to bed, I confronted her. I was tired of the games, the manipulation, the constant undermining of my relationship with my father. I told her I knew exactly what she was doing and that I would not allow her to come between me and my dad. For a brief moment, her mask slipped completely. Her face hardened, eyes cold, as she said, "Your father has a new life now, Patricia. You should be grateful you're still part of it." When I told my father about this exchange the next morning, everything imploded. Diane burst into tears, claiming I had viciously attacked her after all her efforts to bond with me. She twisted my words, making it seem like I was the aggressor, the problem, the obstacle to their happiness. My father, faced with my accusations, and her tears made his choice. He told me I needed to apologize to Diane and make more effort to accept our new family dynamic. That was the first time my father explicitly chose her over me. It would not be the last. From that day forward, a pattern was established. Any conflict between Diane and me would result in my father taking her side, regardless of the circumstances. My voice became increasingly silenced in my own home. My opinions, my feelings, my very presence seemed to irritate Diane, and by extension, my father. I retreated into myself, focusing on school volleyball and the friends who provided the support I no longer found at home. My Aunt Linda, my father's sister, became my lifeline during this period. She had seen through Diane from the beginning, but had kept her concerns quiet for my father's sake. Now, with me struggling so openly, she became my advocate and confidant. During weekend visits to her house, I could breathe freely again, sharing my frustrations without fear of judgment or dismissal. Linda tried to speak to my father several times, gently suggesting that he was overlooking my needs in his eagerness to please his new wife. These conversations inevitably led to arguments with Diane, painting Linda as jealous and interfering. Gradually, my father began limiting his contact with his own sister, another relationship sacrificed on the altar of Diane's insecurity. By the time I was 17, our once close father-daughter bond had been reduced to polite conversations about school and weather. The partner I had found in grief had vanished, replaced by a man who seemed uncomfortable in my presence, as if I were a walking reminder of a life he was trying to forget. I began counting the days until college would provide an escape from the emotional battlefield my home had become. When acceptance letters arrived during my senior year, I chose the university farthest from home, a decision that brought both relief and heartache. Augustana College in Illinois was a 19-hour drive from our home in New Jersey, a distance that felt necessary for my emotional survival. My father expressed surprise at my choice, having assumed I would select a school closer to home. His disappointment was evident, but so was Diane's poorly concealed satisfaction. My Aunt Linda helped me move into my freshman dorm driving the rental truck, while my father and Diane followed in their car. The journey was tense, with Diane micromanaging every aspect of the trip from rest stops to meal choices. When we finally arrived on campus, she took charge of organizing my room, ignoring my preferences and arranging things her way. My father watched helplessly occasionally, trying to suggest alternatives, but ultimately deferring to his wife. The moment they left, I rearranged everything, finally creating a space that was truly mine. That night alone in my dorm room, I cried tears of both grief and liberation. I had lost the close relationship with my father that had once sustained me, but I had gained freedom from Diane's constant manipulation. College life quickly consumed me. I embraced the independence, the intellectual challenges, and the opportunity to define myself beyond the role of the unwanted stepdaughter. I made friends who knew nothing of my family drama and accepted me without preconceptions. I excelled in my classes, particularly in psychology, finding comfort in understanding the dynamics that had shaped my home life. My father made sporadic attempts to maintain our relationship. He would call weekly at first, though these conversations were strained and superficial. Diane would often interrupt, asking to speak with me briefly to deliver some meaningless pleasantry. These calls gradually decreased in frequency until they became monthly obligations rather than meaningful connections. Holidays became particularly difficult navigation exercises. Returning home meant re-entering Diane's domain, where she would perform the role of the caring stepmother for any audience. Thanksgiving of my freshman year set the pattern for future visits. Diane invited her entire extended family, effectively crowding out any opportunity for quiet moments with my father. She served my mother's traditional recipes, but altered them just enough to erase their origin, claiming them as family secrets passed down from her grandmother. When I mentioned missing my mother's cranberry sauce recipe, Diane laughed dismissively, telling everyone present that it's cute how Patricia clings to childhood memories, but it's time to create new traditions. My father, rather than defending me or acknowledging the importance of preserving these connections to my mother, simply nodded in agreement. I spent the remainder of that weekend helping in the kitchen just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. Christmas brought similar performances with Diane, orchestrating elaborate gift exchanges that emphasized her generosity. She would give me expensive but impersonal presents items that demonstrated no understanding of my interests or personality. When opened in front of family and friends, these gifts created the impression of thoughtfulness, while actually highlighting the distance between us. My father would beam with pride at his wife's apparent efforts to connect with me blind to the subtle messaging beneath. During my junior year, everything changed when I met James in my advanced research methods class. Tall, with kind brown eyes and an easy laugh, James was the first person who truly listened when I spoke about my family situation. He didn't offer simplistic advice or dismiss my feelings. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions and expressed genuine outrage at how I'd been treated. Our friendship blossomed into romance over late-night study sessions and weekend coffee dates. For the first time since my mother died, I felt truly seen and valued. James became my safe harbor, the person I could trust with both my joys and sorrows. His own family was warm and welcoming, showing me what healthy family dynamics could look like. During spring break of our junior year, James came home with me to meet my father and Diane. I had warned him about the dynamics he would encounter, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the reality. Diane was in full performance mode, treating me with exaggerated affection when others were watching. My father seemed uncomfortable with James's presence, particularly when James would redirect conversations to include me after Diane had talked over me. The visit reached its breaking point during dinner on the second night. James mentioned how proud he was of my research project, which had been selected for a prestigious undergraduate conference. Before I could elaborate, Diane interrupted with a story about her niece's art show, completely hijacking the conversation. When James politely tried to bring the focus back to my achievement, Diane gave him a cold look before turning to my father and asking about his work schedule. Later that night, in the privacy of our hotel room, James expressed his concern about what he had witnessed. "Your stepmom's behavior isn't just rude, Patricia. It's systematic emotional abuse, and your father is enabling it." His words crystallized what I had felt for years, but had never fully articulated. The validation from someone outside the situation gave me the perspective I had been lacking. My college graduation ceremony became another battlefield. I had earned highest honors and was selected as the student speaker for my department. My Aunt Linda sat in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face. My father and Diane arrived late, missing my speech entirely due to what Diane described as unavoidable traffic. The professional photos from that day tell the story clearly. Linda hugging me tightly while my father stands awkwardly to the side, Diane pulling his attention away from my moment of achievement. During the celebratory dinner afterward, Diane dominated the conversation, with stories about her recent promotion relegating my accomplishments to brief mentions between her anecdotes. When James attempted to toast my achievements, Diane raised her glass and added, "And let's not forget who supported Patricia through college," subtly taking credit for success she had actively tried to undermine. As I packed my belongings to leave campus for the final time, I realized I was not just graduating from college, but also from the illusion that my relationship with my father could ever return to what it had once been. As long as Diane remained between us, genuine connection would be impossible. This recognition was painful but necessary, allowing me to set realistic expectations for my future interactions with my family. I left college with more than a degree. I had gained clarity, confidence, and the courage to build a life defined by my choices rather than others' manipulation. Most importantly, I had found James, who showed me that love should elevate rather than diminish. Together, we would create the kind of home that had been taken from me, one built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than control and performance. The years following graduation allowed me to build a life intentionally separated from the drama of my family situation. James and I moved to Chicago, where I began working for a marketing firm while he pursued his master's degree in educational psychology. We created a home that felt safe and authentic, filled with photos of people we loved, including several of my mother, that my Aunt Linda had preserved for me. My career flourished as I channeled my understanding of human behavior into creating meaningful marketing campaigns. I found particular satisfaction in working with nonprofits focused on supporting children through family transitions. This work became a form of healing, allowing me to transform my painful experiences into something that might help others navigate similar challenges. Contact with my father became increasingly limited, always filtered through Diane's controlling presence. Our phone conversations followed a predictable pattern, brief exchanges about work and weather with Diane hovering nearby, occasionally interjecting comments, or asking my father questions that would divert his attention. Holiday visits became less frequent, limited to brief appearances at major events where social expectations made absence difficult to explain. James proposed on our 4th anniversary during a weekend trip to the Botanical Gardens, where we'd had our first official date. Kneeling beside a fountain surrounded by my favorite flowers, he presented a vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother. The moment was perfect in its simplicity and sincerity, a commitment made without pretense or performance. As we began planning our wedding, the question of my father's role became unavoidable. Despite years of disappointment, I still wanted him present for this milestone. Some childish part of me hoped that my wedding might finally open his eyes to what he had sacrificed in choosing Diane over our relationship. James supported whatever decision I made, but gently reminded me to protect myself from expectations that might lead to further hurt. After weeks of consideration, I made my decision. I would invite my father, but not Diane. Our wedding would be intimate, limited to people who had genuinely supported our relationship and contributed positively to our lives. Diane, who had spent years undermining my happiness and self-worth, had no place in the celebration. I rehearsed the conversation countless times before, finally calling my father on a Sunday evening when I knew he would be alone watching football in his study, while Diane attended her monthly book club. When he answered, his voice carried a warmth that emerged only in Diane's absence, a ghost of our former closeness. Dad I called to talk about the wedding, I began my voice steadier than I felt. James and I have finalized our guest list, and I wanted to personally invite you. That's wonderful, sweetheart, he replied, his tone genuinely pleased. Diane and I have been wondering when I would hear the details. She's already been looking at mother of the groom dresses, though I told her that might be premature. His casual assumption that Diane would not only attend but play a significant role sent a chill through me. Taking a deep breath, I continued with the speech I'd practiced. Dad, this is difficult to say, but I need to be honest. I am inviting you to the wedding, but not Diane. The wedding is small, just people who have been supportive of James and me. Given our history, I don't feel comfortable having her there on what should be the happiest day of my life. The silence that followed felt endless. When he finally spoke, his voice had transformed into something cold and unfamiliar. What exactly are you saying, Patricia, that you would exclude my wife from your wedding after everything she's done for you? The familiar pattern was emerging again, the rewriting of history to cast Diane as the loving stepmother she'd never been. Rather than engaging with this false narrative, I held firm to my truth. Dad, I know this is difficult, but this is my decision. I would love for you to walk me down the aisle to be part of this important day, but I can't pretend that my relationship with Diane is something it's not, especially not on my wedding day. His response escalated quickly, anger replacing his initial shock. You are being childish and selfish. Diane has only ever tried to be a mother to you, and you've rejected her at every turn. If she isn't welcome, then neither am I. Though his words hurt, they weren't unexpected. I had anticipated this ultimatum, the same choice he had been making for 14 years. I understand if that's your decision, Dad. The invitation remains open if you change your mind. I love you, and I hope you'll reconsider. As the conversation ended, I felt a strange combination of grief and relief. The outcome was painful but clarifying. Once again, my father had chosen Diane over me, but this time I was choosing myself, refusing to compromise my boundaries for the sake of an illusion of family harmony. In the following days, I immersed myself in wedding preparations, supported by James, his family, and my Aunt Linda, who had enthusiastically accepted my invitation to walk me down the aisle. I had made my peace with my father's choice, or so I thought. I couldn't have anticipated what would happen next, as my simple boundary setting unleashed a storm that would threaten relationships beyond just my father and me. The first indication of the smear campaign came through my cousin Rachel, who called me 3 days after my conversation with my father. Her voice was hesitant as she asked if everything was okay between me and Uncle Thomas. When I inquired why she was asking, she reluctantly shared that my father had called her parents, describing me as emotionally unstable and vindictive, claiming I was trying to punish him for remarrying by excluding Diane from the wedding. Similar calls came throughout the week. Extended family members and old family friends reached out, each sharing versions of the same narrative. I was being unreasonable, disrespecting my father, and cruelly excluding my stepmother, who had only ever shown me love. Some calls were confrontational with distant relatives I barely knew, lecturing me about family obligation. Others were concerned, wondering if I needed professional help to work through my apparent issues with my father's happiness. The campaign moved to social media when Diane posted a long, emotionally charged status update about the pain of step-parenting an ungrateful child. Without naming me directly, she included enough specific details that anyone who knew our family would immediately recognize the subject. She portrayed herself as a woman who had sacrificed everything to create a blended family, only to be rejected by a daughter who couldn't move beyond childish jealousy. The post received dozens of sympathetic comments, including several from my father's friends, who tagged him, expressing outrage on Diane's behalf and offering prayers for her strength during this difficult time. My father responded publicly, thanking everyone for their support and adding that some children never truly grow up, a thinly veiled reference to me that stung despite my attempts to remain detached from the drama. The most painful blow came when a childhood friend forwarded me screenshots from a private community group where Diane had shared fabricated stories about my behavior, claiming I had threatened her physically during my last visit home and suggesting I was emotionally abusive toward my father. These lies were not just hurtful, but potentially damaging to my professional reputation in a world where online information could be accessed by current and future employers. The betrayal cut deep. While I had expected resistance to my boundary, I never imagined my father would participate in such a public assassination of my character. Each new message or discovery sent me spiraling into anxiety and self-doubt. Was I the villain in this story? Was I being unreasonable? Despite James and Linda's reassurances, the constant barrage of accusations made it difficult to maintain my certainty. James became my rock during this period, fielding calls from concerned mutual friends and standing firm in our decision. You are not asking for anything outrageous, he reminded me repeatedly. A wedding is about celebrating with people who support you. You don't need to justify your guest list to anyone. My Aunt Linda proved invaluable contacting family members with whom she had influence to counter the narrative being spread. Having witnessed Diane's behaviour over the years, she could speak with authority about the dynamics at play. She also provided tangible evidence of Diane's manipulation, sharing emails and text messages she'd saved over the years, conversations in which Diane had revealed her true feelings about me when she thought she was speaking to an ally. Despite this support, the emotional toll was immense. I found myself unable to sleep replaying conversations and imagining worst-case scenarios. My work performance suffered as I struggled to concentrate on anything beyond the family drama. Even wedding planning, which should have been joyful, became overshadowed by anxiety about who might refuse to attend or cause a scene if they did come. The situation reached its breaking point when my father escalated his campaign by sending a group email to our entire extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends. The email detailed a list of grievances against me, most of them fabricated or grossly exaggerated. He claimed I had refused to participate in family therapy he'd supposedly suggested years ago, though no such suggestion had ever been made. He described tearful attempts by Diane to connect with me that had never occurred. Most painfully, he suggested that my mother would be ashamed of the person I had become, weaponizing her memory in a way that felt unforgivable. When I received this email, copied along with dozens of others, something broke inside me. The father I had loved, who had held me through my mother's death and promised to always protect me, was now using my most vulnerable points to publicly wound me. In that moment, I realized that the man who had been my hero no longer existed if he ever truly had. James found me sitting on our bathroom floor, the printed email crumpled in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Without a word, he sat beside me, pulling me into his arms and letting me sob until I had no tears left. When the storm finally passed, he helped me to bed and made a decision that would change everything. He called my father's sister Linda and my father's oldest friend Robert, asking them to intervene before irreparable damage was done to the family. As I drifted into exhausted sleep that night, I wondered if anything would ever resolve the pain that had defined my relationship with my father for so long. I had stood my ground, refusing to compromise on my boundaries, but the cost seemed impossibly high. What I didn't know then was that the very public nature of my father's attack would ultimately lead to the confrontation that had been brewing for 14 years. Finally forcing the truth into the open, where it could no longer be denied or rewritten. With only 2 weeks until the wedding, final preparations should have consumed all my attention. Instead, I found myself agreeing to a meeting that I both dreaded and desperately needed. My Aunt Linda had convinced my father to meet with me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Her argument that he owed me the chance to respond to his accusations face to face had somehow penetrated his anger. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered some privacy while still being in public view. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged and rearranged the sugar packets, a nervous habit left over from childhood. When my father walked through the door, I barely recognized him. In just a few weeks, he seemed to have aged years. His shoulders hunched forward as if carrying a physical burden. The confident stride I had once admired, now reduced to hesitant steps. "Patricia," he acknowledged stiffly, sliding into the seat across from me. Despite the formality in his voice, I caught a flicker of something else in his eyes. Uncertainty, regret, whatever it was, vanished quickly, replaced by the guarded expression that had become his default in my presence. We began with awkward small talk about the weather and traffic, both avoiding the reason for our meeting. Finally, gathering my courage, I placed a folder on the table between us. "Dad, before we discuss the wedding or anything else, I need you to see these," I said, opening the folder to reveal printed copies of emails, text messages, and social media posts, a documented history of Diane's behavior toward me. "These aren't manipulated or taken out of context," I continued. "These are Diane's own words over the years, messages she sent when she thought no one else would see, comments she made when she thought she was safe to express how she really feels about me." His face remained impassive as he slowly reviewed the evidence before him. Text messages where Diane had complained about having to include me in holiday plans. Emails to friends where she referred to me as the baggage she had to accept to have him. Social media messages where she had mocked my career choices and relationship with James. "This doesn't prove anything," he said eventually, though his voice lacked conviction. "You can't possibly understand the challenges Diane faced trying to mother a teenager who clearly resented her." I took a deep breath, determined to maintain my composure. Dad, I was 14 when you married her. I welcomed her into our home. I tried for years to build a relationship with her. The problem was never that she wasn't my mother. The problem was how she treated me when you weren't looking and how you consistently chose not to see it. For the first time, I didn't hold back. I detailed specific incidents: the 16th birthday, when she had deliberately left me stranded. The time she'd thrown away the jewelry box my mother had left for me, claiming it was an accident during spring cleaning. The graduation dinner where she'd gone out of her way to minimize my achievements. As I spoke, something shifted in my father's expression. The defensive barrier began to crack, revealing glimpses of the man I'd once known. When I finally fell silent, the weight of 14 years of unspoken truth hanging between us, he looked down at his hands. I didn't want to see it, he admitted quietly. After your mother died, I was so lost. When I met Diane, she made me feel whole again. I needed that so badly that I refused to question it, even when the signs were right in front of me. It was the first honest acknowledgement he'd ever made about the dynamics in our home, a tentative step toward the truth we'd both been avoiding for so long. But before we could explore this fragile moment of connection further, the cafe door swung open violently. Diane stormed toward our table, her face contorted with rage. "So this is where you've been hiding," she spat at my father. Meeting behind my back with her after everything she's done to us, her unexpected appearance confirmed my suspicion that she'd been tracking my father's location, perhaps through his phone. The performative Diane, the woman who maintained a perfect public facade, was nowhere to be seen. In her place stood someone raw and unfiltered, revealing the person I'd always known existed beneath the mask. "Thomas." "We are leaving right now," she demanded, grabbing his arm. "I will not stand by while she poisons you against me with her lies and manipulations." My father, to my surprise, didn't immediately stand. Instead, he looked from Diane to me and back again, as if seeing both of us clearly for the first time. "Diane." "Please sit down," he said calmly. "Patricia and I are having an important conversation." "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed loud enough for nearby patrons to turn and stare. "After everything I've done for you, for this family, you're taking her side now." "I'm not taking sides," he responded, his voice growing firmer. "I'm trying to understand why my daughter and my wife can't seem to exist in the same space without conflict. And right now, you're demonstrating exactly what Patricia has been trying to tell me." The scene escalated quickly. Diane began crying loudly, shifting tactics from aggression to victimhood with practiced ease. When this failed to move my father, she returned to anger, making increasingly dramatic accusations about my behavior over the years, claims so outlandish that they undermined any credibility she might have had. Throughout her performance, I remained silent, understanding that nothing I could say would be more revealing than what she was freely demonstrating. My father watched her with a growing look of recognition, as if seeing a familiar painting from a new angle that revealed previously hidden details. Finally, when her tirade began to draw too much attention from other customers, my father stood and gently but firmly suggested they continue this discussion at home. As they prepared to leave, he turned to me with an expression I'd not seen in years, one that contained both apology and clarity. "Patricia, I think I understand now," he said softly. "We need to talk again soon." As they walked away, Diane clinging possessively to his arm while shooting venomous glances over her shoulder, I realized I had witnessed something significant. The carefully constructed narrative that had defined our family for years had finally begun to unravel. Whether this would lead to healing or further estrangement remained uncertain, but the truth once exposed could not be unseen. I left the cafe with mixed emotions swirling through me. There was vindication in having my experiences finally acknowledged, but also grief for the years lost to Diane's manipulation and my father's willful blindness. Most of all, there was a cautious hope that perhaps after all this time, my father might finally be ready to see the reality of the situation he had helped create. As I drove home to James, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. Whatever happened next with my father, I had spoken my truth without compromise or apology. That alone felt like a victory worth celebrating. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright sunlight streaming through the windows of the hotel suite where my bridesmaids and I prepared for the day ahead. Despite the perfect weather, my emotions remained complicated. 1 week had passed since the confrontation at the cafe, and I had heard nothing from my father. No call, no message, not even a response to the final invitation I'd sent, leaving the door open for his attendance without Diane. My Aunt Linda knocked gently before entering the suite, already dressed in her elegant navy blue gown. She had embraced her role as the person who would walk me down the aisle with characteristic grace and enthusiasm. When I expressed concern that she might feel uncomfortable taking my father's place, she had simply said, "Honey, family isn't always blood, and blood isn't always family. It's my honor to stand beside you." Now, as the stylist put the finishing touches on my hair, Linda sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. "You look exactly like your mother right now," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, Patricia. So proud of your strength and your capacity for joy despite everything." Her words touched the exact center of my heart. Throughout the chaos of recent weeks, I'd found myself longing for my mother's guidance more than ever. Having Linda affirm that connection felt like a blessing, a reminder that my mother's love remained with me even in her absence. The ceremony was scheduled for 4:00 in a historic garden pavilion a short drive from the hotel. As we made final adjustments to my gown, a simple, elegant design with delicate lace detailing that reminded me of my mother's wedding dress, I felt a surprising sense of peace wash over me. Whatever happened today, I was marrying the man I loved, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for us. That was enough. James and I had decided against the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony, instead planning a private first look in the gardens, where we could share a moment of calm before the festivities began. When I saw him waiting for me among the roses, his back turned until I called his name, the last traces of anxiety melted away. His face, as he turned to see me for the first time in my wedding dress, held everything I needed: love, admiration, and the promise of a future built on mutual respect and understanding. We are going to be okay, I thought, as we held each other better than okay. We are going to create the kind of marriage that heals rather than hurts, that builds up rather than tears down. In that moment, I felt genuinely sorry for my father, who had settled for so much less in his desperate fear of being alone. The ceremony proceeded perfectly, the gardens filled with smiling faces of friends and chosen family. My college roommate sang the song my mother had once hummed while cooking Sunday breakfast. James' nephew carried our rings with solemn importance. My Aunt Linda, strong and steady beside me, answered the question of who gives this woman with a clear voice. She gives herself with the blessing of those who love her truly. As we exchanged vows, I scanned the assembled guests one last time, unable to completely extinguish the hope that my father might have appeared at the last moment. The empty seat I'd reserved for him remained unoccupied, a small reminder of what was missing amidst all that was gloriously present. The reception was in full swing, dinner finished, and dancing well underway when I noticed a disturbance near the entrance to the banquet hall. James' brother, who had taken on the role of unofficial security, was speaking with someone just outside my line of sight. When he caught my eye, he gestured subtly, asking if I wanted to come over. To my astonishment, my father stood in the doorway alone and holding a small wrapped package. He looked uncertain, almost fragile in his formal suit, his eyes scanning the room as if unsure of his welcome. Without Diane's controlling presence beside him, he seemed both smaller and somehow more himself than he had in years. I excused myself from the conversation with James' parents and made my way across the room, my heart racing with conflicting emotions. As I approached, I noticed details that hadn't been visible from a distance: the slight tremor in his hands, the redness around his eyes, suggesting recent tears, the careful way he had styled his hair, just as he used to for special occasions when I was a child. "Patricia," he began, his voice breaking slightly on my name. "I know I have no right to be here. I understand if you ask me to leave, but I couldn't let this day pass without at least trying to be the father you deserved all along." In his eyes, I saw genuine regret, not the performative sorrow Diane had modeled for so long. This was raw and real, the pain of a man finally confronting the consequences of his choices. "Did you come alone?" I asked, the only question that really mattered in that moment. He nodded. "Yes. Diane and I are taking some time apart. After what happened at the cafe, I started seeing things differently. 14 years too late, I know, but I'm trying to understand now. I'm seeing a therapist to help me make sense of how I let things get so broken between us." His honesty disarmed me. For so long, I'd imagined this moment, rehearsed what I would say if he ever acknowledged the truth of our situation. Now that it was happening, those prepared speeches felt unnecessary. Instead, I simply asked, "Would you like to come in? There's cake left." It wasn't complete forgiveness, not yet. There were conversations we still needed to have, years of hurt that couldn't be erased in a single evening. But it was an opening, a possibility that hadn't existed before. He accepted the invitation with visible relief, following me to a quiet table away from the main festivities. James joined us briefly, shaking my father's hand with cautious politeness before giving us space to talk. We spoke little at first, the music and laughter around us filling the awkward silences. Eventually, my father handed me the small package he'd been holding. When I unwrapped it, I found a silver frame containing a photograph I hadn't seen in years, my mother and me at the beach, both laughing as waves crashed around our knees. It had been her favorite picture one that had disappeared from our home shortly after Diane moved in. I found it in the attic last week, he explained, while looking for something else. There was a whole box of photos Diane had told me she'd donated to make space. Seeing them again, realizing she'd lied about something so important. It was like waking up from a very long sleep. We talked, then really talked for the first time in years. Not about everything, there wasn't time for that, but enough to establish a fragile bridge between who we'd been and who we might become to each other. When the DJ announced the last dance of the evening, my father hesitantly asked if I would consider sharing it with him. As we moved awkwardly around the edge of the dance floor, he whispered, "I'm so sorry, Patricia, for everything. I know I can't make up for all the years I failed you, but if you're willing, I'd like to try to be a better father moving forward." I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I offered honesty. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, but I'm willing to see where this goes, one step at a time. When the music ended, he kissed my cheek gently before stepping back, respecting the boundaries that still needed to exist between us. James appeared at my side, supportive as always, as my father thanked us both for allowing him to be part of the day and quietly took his leave. The months following the wedding brought gradual, cautious rebuilding. My father continued therapy, gaining insights into how his grief and fear of loneliness had made him vulnerable to Diane's manipulation. He and Diane eventually separated permanently, a decision he made not for me but for himself, recognizing the unhealthy dynamics that had defined their relationship from the beginning. Our reconciliation was not the stuff of fairy tales. There were difficult conversations, setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. But there was also genuine effort on both sides, a mutual commitment to creating something new and healthier than what had been lost. I learned valuable lessons through this long journey of loss, betrayal, and eventual healing. I learned that standing firm in your truth, even when others try to rewrite it, is an act of necessary self-preservation. I learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and that healthy relationships can only be built on honest acknowledgement of past wounds. Most importantly, I learned that family is defined not by obligation, but by love, respect, and consistent presence in both difficult and joyful moments. Today, 2 years after my wedding day, I can say with confidence that the relationship my father and I are building is stronger and more authentic than anything we had before. It's not perfect, and the scars of our past remain visible if you know where to look, but there's a genuine connection now, one based on truth rather than pretense or obligation. If you've ever found yourself silenced by someone who claimed to love you, forced to accept mistreatment for the sake of keeping peace, know that you deserve better. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for your emotional survival. Those who truly love you will respect those boundaries, even when doing so is difficult or uncomfortable. And those who don't perhaps never loved you in the way you deserved in the first place. What do you think about my decision not to invite Diane to my wedding? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own well-being, even when others criticized you for it? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it resonated with you. Thank you for listening, and remember that your truth matters, even when others try to deny it.